Welcome to Living on the Edge. We're in episode number 5 of a parenting series. It's called House or Home, God's Blueprint for Great Parenting. Now here's what I want to ask you. If Jesus walked into the room and sat down with your child, maybe they're a toddler, maybe they're a preteen or even a teenager, and the child said, Jesus, what do you want me to do? What exactly does it look like to please you and please my mom and dad? What do you think Jesus would say to him? Well, you don't have to wonder. That's today on Living on the Edge.
When you think about it, everybody in this room, anybody that ever listens to what I'm saying right now is a child of someone. You think, you could be a 6-year-old child, you can be a 16-year-old child, you can be a 36-year-old child, you can be a 50-year-old child, but if you have a mom and dad, or even a mom, or just a dad, we're children at different ages. And we're going to talk about, so far we've said, is there a parent in the house? And then we move to that to say, what's a parent to do? This is actually directed toward children. Now don't get upset like, wow, like I was 16 many, many years ago, or I was 12. We're going to talk to 3 groups. What does God say to smaller children? What's God say to like teenagers and young adults? And then what's he say to us that are grown that have maybe even aging parents? Because the Bible's very, very clear about what a child is to do. Now, some of what I'm going to share, because the culture has changed so much, it's going to sound like, you got to be kidding me. That is really, the Bible really says that I'm supposed to do this or my kids are supposed to do that? The answer is going to be yes. But you can't really, experience what I'm going to say until you realize how radical it was in the culture that it was written. Sometimes we think that the world we're living in is kind of the world. Well, this was written a couple thousand years ago. And the greatest liberator on the planet of women was Jesus. And the greatest liberator of children on the planet was Jesus. Both were seen as just a piece of property. Both were bought and sold and used. Listen carefully. Just imagine, if you will, being at a little church called Ephesus. And a scroll has come, the Apostle Paul has written it, and you're told, you're Timothy, and you're going to read it, and this is God's word to the church. And by the way, when you would look around in this church, the kids wouldn't be off somewhere else. This is actually directed right to the children, so he expects the children that are old enough to understand, about 3rd grade on up or so, to really hear. And just, if you were a child back then, here's the world that you had been born into. 4 characteristics of children during the Roman Empire. Number 1, it was called the Roman patria potestas. That's Latin for the father's power or rule. A father could sell his children as slaves. He could make them work in the fields, even in chains. He could punish them as he liked. A father could even inflict the death penalty, and the Roman government would not say a word. The father had absolute power and right over you if you were a child. That would not be a pretty place to grow up. The second characteristic of children in the Roman Empire was called the custom of child exposure. So when a child was born, the father would sit in a chair, and they would take the brand new baby and lay the child at the father's feet. If the father reached down and picked up the child, it was kept. If the father saw the child, maybe it wasn't the sex that he wanted. Maybe there was something about the child that just wasn't attractive. If he got up and walked away from the chair, the child was killed. And I want you to get that in your mind, because when the Apostle Paul talks about kids and their value and how we take care of them and then their responsibility later to us, This is radical. This isn't like what people would be used to. It's not like kids really matter and they're important and we should love our children. Third characteristic in the Roman Empire, unwanted children were commonly left in the Roman Forum. There they became the property of anyone who cared to pick them up. They were collected at nights by people who nourished them in order to later sell them or slaves, or to stock the brothels of Rome, both boys and girls. So if your parents, you were having a little bad attitude and they're kind of tired of you and they just decided, you just really don't want you, they would just drop, like Goodwill, those outdoor ones, you just drop them out there and hope someone picks them up. They would just drop you off And then like vultures, someone would feed you and take care of you to get you healthy enough to sell you, either as a slave or as a child prostitute. Fourth aspect, the ancient civilization was merciless to the sickly or the deformed child. Seneca, who was an orator of the time, wrote this. He was a Greek orator in this time. We slaughter a fierce ox. We strangle a mad dog. We plunge the knife into sickly cattle, lest they taint the herd. Children who are born weakly and deformed, we drown. And so all I want you to hear is that when you hear what God says to the Apostle Paul to kids, this book, by God's power, over thousands of years, has the dignity of human life and of children and women and the weak and the hurting. Any one of us could have been that in that day. And so let's talk about God's very first words. If you would open the Bible and say, when does God ever speak about children? I mean, what's the first time he speaks about children? You have to go back to Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. And we get a command. Most of you know probably that there was, Moses got 2 commands. The first tablet had 4 commands, and it was about your relationship vertically with God. The second tablet, there were 6 commands, unlike on cartoons when there's 5 and 5. And 6 through 10 were about your relationships with people. And the first and primary command was your relationship with your folks. And so it says, honor your father and mother. That's a command. The promise, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And so the motive was, honor your father and mother. We'll talk about what that means, so that you could prosper, so you could get God's best. The word honor here means, by definition, it means literally to be heavy. It means to glorify, to ascribe value and worth. It means to respect them, to hold them in high regard. This same form that's used right here in this 5th command is used in 3 other specific places. In Leviticus 19:3, the word is translated fear or awe or respect. So the idea of honor is fear and awe and respect. In Deuteronomy 26:19, it meant to give fame or praise, to speak well of. It has the idea to honor your folks is to enhance their reputation. And then finally in 1 Samuel 2:29 and 30, it has the idea of wanting to please someone, to hold what they think, and to honor that relationship above every other relationships. And so, I mean, that's strong. God, when he speaks to children, says, look, I'm creating an order in the world. I'm giving you the most basic commands that reveal my character for your good. First command in human relationships: children, have respect, awe, and reverential fear for your parents. They matter. I, God, the creator of the universe, have placed them over you. And there's a way that children honor their parents. There's a way that young adults and teenagers honor their parents. And there's a way that grown adults honor their parents. Why, though? When you think about this, why did God give this command? Why is it so important? I'd suggest 3 reasons. 1, it's the foundation for human relationship. Okay? This whole idea of a family, it didn't just come out of thin air. Human relationship and family, there's priority and authority and responsibility and roles. And God says this is how it works. It starts with a mother and a father and a relationship with their kids. Second, it's the foundation for respect of authority. I mean, all relationships, all civilizations, there needs to be this respect for authority. And God has instituted where it begins with your kids. And it begins with your kids understanding at an early age that those in authority, especially their parents, need to be respected in a very positive way. And as you can see in our culture, that's been eroded. And think about this. If kids can't honor the authority of people that they can see, how will they ever honor the authority of a God that they can't see? See, this is really, really important. And sort of our casual, it doesn't matter. I mean, now in, a lot of schools, even teachers, just call me Bob. I'm your 8th grade teacher. Call me Mary. We're all called on the same plane. And sort of this super laid back experience. There is a place for, Mr. So-and-so or some honor. Some parts of the country do that really well. I'm from a part of the country that doesn't do that very well out there on the West Coast. Third reason is the foundation for human development. How you relate to your parents will directly affect your self-esteem, your morals, your values, your sexual identity, your worldview, and your relationship with God. I mean, you can do all the studies in the world. How many of us talk about our family of origin? That word we call baggage, how we respond, our family systems. All that stuff has to do with what God created. Now, let's ask and answer the three big questions. As a child, how do I honor my parents? As a teen or young adult, how do I honor my parents? And then for those of us that are grown, how do I honor my parents? What's it look like to honor our parents? As a child, I honor my parents by obeying them. Now, so far in this series, are we starting to get an inkling that there's a little emphasis here, you know? Parents, here's what you do. Teach them to obey. Children, obey your parents. You know, this is big. Notice the text. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. Notice the Apostle Paul, he's reaching back to the fifth command, which is the first command with the promise that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. And so just by way of review, the word to obey, hupo, to be under, kuo, the hearing of. So we want to teach our kids from early on till they get older, till they get older, till they get older. They don't have to agree with you, but what they need to do is obey you and respect you. Now, we need to be easy to obey and easy to respect by being fair and caring, and along with the limits, having very loving relationships. But children, I mean, this isn't what parents were telling their children. The Apostle Paul is assuming they're in the room, and they're reading from God's word. And just the kids were in the room hearing, parents, this is how you respond to your children, and now they're hearing God say, children. When's the last time your children heard from someone else other than you? You are to obey God. When I taught this at our church, I told all the people a week in advance, I don't know what your personal policy is. Our personal policy, when my kids were about second grade all the way up, we sat together in church together. I mean, Saturday night, by the time they got to be teenagers, often they would maybe sit with their friends, we'd go out to dinner and talk about things later. But your kids need to see you worship. Because the fact is that a lot of what they catch of your heart for God is they just catch. You know, depending on your background, you can be singing and maybe you're mouthing your lips like this, or a tear comes down and you lift your hands, and you're a 7, 8, 9-year-old, and they're looking at you going, I wonder why mom's crying. What's going on? What is she experiencing that I don't know? And then they start passing around these little cups, and there's some wine in them and this funny-looking bread. And hey, what's that, Dad? What's the deal with this? See, what happens now, we've segregated the church so much generationally, is that we have this group and that group in 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th and then high school. And there's kids that the only time they've ever in a worship service with their mother and father are like Easter and Christmas. And now we're shocked. Out of about 80% of all the kids in Bible-believing evangelical churches go away to college, and within 5 years they don't return to the church. Well, I wonder why. We've niche marketed. What we've done is we've said, we want to meet your needs. We want everything to work for you in your way. Instead of, guess what? It's okay for a kid to be bored. It's okay for a kid to color for a while. It's okay to see you say, remember those old days, some of you? Man, I remember getting a look from my mom, and it was like, I'll tell you what, I think I better do something or death is going to follow church, you know? But I still remember we came from a little bit different tradition, and we weren't a Bible believing family, but my mom as a little girl came to Christ and married and realized that she didn't want to have the same kind of problem that she saw in her family, where her dad went to one church and her mom went to another church. And so I still remember my mom kneeling down as they came in, and she was praying and mouthing her lips, and I remember tears coming down her face. And I'm like 8 years old. And you know, at 8, you know, I'm not going to kneel, it hurts my knees. And I'm just watching her, you know. And I still remember thinking, I wonder who she's talking to. I wonder who you talk to with that kind of intensity that tears come out of your eyes. That was worth about 5,000 sermons. See, what I caught was, I don't know what she has, but I want that. What I know is she's strong inside, and I don't know where she gets it. And so it's really important that I think that, now, that means that for some of you, you end up staying at church 2 hours. And as a pastor, I just got to tell you, we'll have a real problem here. For some of you, that means you have a parking problem, so you can kind of park a little bit off site. And that you serve, you come together as a church and you worship with your kids. And then let your kids have that great experience in an age graded, and you could go serve somewhere. It's a novel idea. It's a non-consumeristic way of looking at it. And what you'll find is you can go serve somewhere in the church that second hour, and you'll find that some of the people that are most loved, most connected, and most growing spiritually are people that are actually involved, not just in hearing, but actually connected in the church. And so, here you have a great situation where children are said, this is the first, by the way, it doesn't mean it's the very first ever commandment. The idea of the text here, it's the priority. It's very important. I'm putting it up there as the issue you need to deal with. So, think about this. God chooses to actually speak directly to kids that are of age that can understand. And whether that's 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 years old, but apparently, because the word for child here is not like older child. It's the word for a small child. And he says small children. In fact, like I said, when I taught this, I said, bring your kids next week. God wants to say something to them. And I watched them, 6-year-old and 7-year-old and an occasional 5-year-old. And one, I try and do my best to keep their interest. But it's an amazing thing for them to hear a quote from their pastor, little boy, little girl, let me tell you something. It's God's will for you to obey your mom and dad. This word parent here is a Latin phrase, in loco Dei. In loco Dei. It's a legal term in Latin. You know what it means, the word parent? In the place of God. And so I wanted our people in the church, I wanted their kids to hear, not just from their mom and dad, from me. When you obey God, when you're parents, you obey God. And when you are obeying God, the way you show that is by obeying your parents. You don't have to agree with them, but God put them over you. A lot of kids have never heard that. A lot of parents, don't assume that what's happening culturally or even in churches today is the way God's always had it. This always gets overlaid with culture, and some good and some bad. But I would encourage you, what happens when a parent says, I'm going to take moral responsibility for our home. I'm going to be the one that makes sure my kid has a Christian education, not the school, not the church. I'm glad for the school. I'm glad for the church. I'm glad for good news clubs. I'm glad for videos. But at the end of the day, when you have the shift and you say, I am my children's number one teacher. If they learn about God, they're going to learn from me. If they memorize verses, they're going to learn from me. We're going to have bedtime stories. When they're small, I'm going to take raising my kids as serious as someone who is preparing for an IPO, for the biggest deal of their life. And if you had hundreds of millions or billions of dollars on the table in a business deal, I will tell you what, you would be absolutely prepared and ready to go in when you went public. And see, what happens is what we do is we take our kids public. We get them for about 18 years, and then they go public. And they have your name attached. And they have Christ's name attached. And you know what? I just want a real successful child that's a public IPO for the glory of God and for their good. And so, first and foremost, I want to teach my kids. And we talked about that last session. When they're small, this is how I teach them to obey. When they get to those tween ages, preteen, and, I want them to learn to be responsible. And then as they're teenagers, young adults, I want them to make great decisions, and that's my game plan. So, young children, all of you in here, all you 5 and 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, obey your mom and dad. Second, as a young person, I honor my parents by respecting and cooperating with them. Respecting and cooperating with them. And I see this as teenagers all the way through early adults, and by an early adult, if you're living in your folks' home, if they're helping you with the insurance, if they're paying for your college, if you're living at home, we always have this deal, right? I thought when my kids turned 18, parenting is over. I don't know why I thought that. But I just thought, okay, 18 years, and you release them. from 18 to about 20 or 21, there were times it was harder than when they were 2 and 3. Because this thing happens. Hey, 18, I'm an adult. I make my own decisions now. According to the government, I mean, now you're legally responsible, and I'm 18, I can go into places. And okay, big 18-year-old who's totally grown up. You want to totally grow up and pay all for your college yourself? You want to be totally grown up and pay all the insurance for your car yourself? I mean, see, this deal is that puts you in a hard spot is they want all the authority, but they don't want all the responsibility. And so what you need to do, by the way, this has happened in our culture. It didn't used to be this way. I mean, you go back several hundred years, you were 12, 15, 13, you know what? You were declared a man at about 13 or 14. You know, young girls were getting married. Mary was probably, the mother of our Lord, probably married at 15, 16 years old. Well, guess what? You know, you got a job. There was responsibility. People matured early, but we've created this adolescence deal. And that keeps expanding. I mean, 20-somethings are like 20. You know, the average video game player age is 25 years old in all of America. There's a lot of worn out thumbs there. And a lot of people not doing a lot of work. And so the tension is, okay, how do you honor your parents? Do we need to let out the rope of responsibility and authority? Absolutely. Do they need to make more and more of their own decisions? Absolutely. But as we give them more and more rope of responsibility, they need to assume, okay, you know what? You pay, like my kids, I can help you out a little, but all my boys bought their own first cars. Okay? I'll help you out with insurance. You pay all the gas. And, you know, just little by little. You know, I'm where I was at in my life, and everyone has a different theory on this, but it was like, guys, I'll tell you what, I'm working like crazy. I've got 4 kids. Get a really good job. I'll give you as much money as I can to help you with your college. But you know something? I pay for my college. You really want to go? You can figure this out. I wanted the weight of responsibility to be on them. Now, we helped them a lot, and we were able to pay all the tuitions, but, you know, spending money and books and part of room and board, different seasons with different kids, but it was just a straight up, we're in this together. And that's what you want to do. You want them to feel the responsibility, and then you give more and more of the authority so that that dependence shifts from you to God, and they make great decisions. Now, what I would want to say to those teenagers and to those young adults is the way you honor your folks, even when you really disagree with them, if you're living in their home, you need to cooperate and you need to respect them. Listen to what the scripture says, Proverbs 23:22. Listen to your father. I love that. I mean, it says more, but I kind of like this first part a lot. I'd like to pause. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother. My wife likes that. When she's old. It goes on to say, if you curse your parents, Proverbs 20:20, your life will end like a lamp that goes out in the dark. Now, this is from the wisest man who ever lived, Solomon. And you might jot in your notes Deuteronomy chapter 21. Just as a little side note you might want to read. If a child was incorrigible, if a child wouldn't respond, if a child was rebellious, if a child did the kind of things that are in this passage, in Deuteronomy 21, it was under God's theocracy. Now, do you know what the penalty was? This wasn't like you got your wrist slapped and you had a timeout and couldn't use the car. It was the death penalty. A rebellious child. I mean, and you think, whoa. I just want you to see how far. I mean, not obeying your parents, not cooperating with your parents, disrespecting your parents, dissing your parents, talking evil of your parents, knowing they've said, do not do these things, and playing a separate game behind their back. This is really, really serious stuff. And teenagers need to hear that and know God will hold you responsible. A lot of the lack of blessing in teenagers and young adults' lives is this double life they have. They got a Facebook page that you can see. I got news. They got another one that you can't see. They got friends you think they have. It is amazing. You can meet these sweet little girls or guys that you think are the all-American boys, and you go on a social website and you hear what they're saying or what they're doing or the YouTube stuff they're passing on to other people, and you're going, are you kidding? And you know what they need to hear? You're on very, very serious ground with a very holy God. And a very holy God will hold you accountable. And there's some young people that can't figure out why opportunities don't happen, why God doesn't bless their work, why they're frustrated, why relationships keep breaking down. I got news for you. When you position yourself disrespecting and not cooperating with your parents, you're not in a position to receive the favor and the blessing of God.
As we wrap up our time together, this is definitely one of those times I wish I could come out of the television set and grab a cup of coffee and sit down with you and talk about, hey, how you doing? I mean, I've taught a lot on parenting. I have 4 grown children. I actually have 8 grandchildren, and I've sort of been through the ringer on all this parenting stuff. And when I've taught this, whether here or around the world, I can tell you one thing. Most parents who really make a difference realize the issue isn't techniques. The issue isn't all the stuff I need to know. The issue is I really need to be what I want my children to become. I need to be worthy of respect. And when we're honest, we realize, we are doing some things and living in some ways, and there's some duplicity that we do not want our children to imitate, but what I can tell you is they will. And so I would just remind you that you serve a God who loves you, who cares about you, who forgives. And maybe the greatest thing you'll ever do as a parent has nothing to do with your child and has everything to do with you saying, Lord, I mean business. I need your help. I want to live a life that's worthy of respect. I've got to reprioritize. I need to get back in your word. I need to talk to you honestly. I need to get in community with some people and grow. And I need to be the man or the woman that my kids will look up to one day and say, I want to be like Dad. I want to be like Mom. And believe me, you'll never regret that decision. Go for it.